Hello everyone, Carl Schoof back with the TimelineLite Ultimate Starter Guide on ActiveTuts Plus. Today I'm going to be talking about advanced sequencing. I'm going to show you how you can group multiple tweens and timelines inside of a master TimelineLite and have precise control over all the relative timing of all those tweens. In this example here, I'm literally nesting a whole bunch of sub-timeline lights inside of one master timeline, and the scrubber allows me to control it. You may not believe me now, but the entire timeline that this scrubber is controlling only contains 2 lines of code. If I restart the timeline, we have a group of tweens for the text and then a group of timeline lights for each blob here. We're going to be using the appendMultiple method quite a bit, which allows us to add multiple tweens and timelines to a master timeline. And I've built what's called the TweenMax visualizer so that we can see exactly how changing different parameters of the appendMultiple method will greatly change the style of animation that you get. Right now there's just a very basic timeline animation that will play where 3 items get tweened at once. If I change the alignment mode over to sequence, that automatically means that one box will animate after the next. Doing something like that will also change the total time of the animation and also the start times of the tweens. I'll be using this tool quite a bit to really show you how each of the parameters will affect the animation. A main focus of this tutorial is going to be showing you how to take a lot of code like this and condensing it down to very little code. So there's a lot of exciting stuff to talk about in this session, and by the end you're going to be near masters of TimelineLite. So let's take a look at the first file we'll be working on. I'm going to open the Swift up and notice that we have the intro animation for the text, and then we have a series of blobs animating. Now for the intro text, each piece of text does its own unique animation. Meat comes in from the left, the comes in from the top, blobs comes in from the right. So watch that one more time. And then each blob does virtually the same thing. It just scales up with a little back ease out on the end there. So we're going to be approaching how to group 3 different tweens together, and then also how to group a whole bunch of similar tweens together. Now, really quickly, the instance names here are meat.mc, the.mc, and blobs.mc. And all these guys here are just blob1mc through blob7mc. I already have some code in this file, which looks exactly like what you would do if you've been following this series up to this point. You have a sequence of tweens, and it would only be logical to use a series of append methods to place them all in the timeline, and they would all play one after each other. Now what we're going to do is focus on using the appendMultiple method to condense each of these groups of tweens. Okay, because let's take a look right here first. All of these tweens are exactly the same. And whenever you have code that repeats like this, it makes it very difficult to make global changes to all of these tweens. Right now, if I wanted each tween to be a little bit shorter, I'd have to change that 7 times for the duration. If I wanted to add a little bit more of a stagger or overlap, I would have to add an offset value to each tween. So using appendMultiple, we're going to be able to put all 7 tweens into the timeline at once, and they're all going to share the same target values. It's going to be awesome. Now for the intro text, each tween is unique, meaning that we're tweening different properties. We're still going to be using appendMultiple, but we're going to be using it in a slightly different way. So let's take a quick look at the appendMultiple documentation. You'll see that the appendMultiple method takes in a tweens array parameter, okay? And the first parameter here is an array containing any or all of the following: TweenLite, TweenMax, TimelineLite, or TimelineMax instances. So what we're going to do is provide an array that contains many tweens. We'll talk about the offset, align, and stagger value as we move on. In Flash, I'm going to just do this. I'm going to say tl.appendMultiple, and you'll see here that I'm being asked for an array of tweens. And I'm going to manually create my array here. I'm going to use the array bracket syntax. I'm just going to give myself a little breathing room here. And I'm going to populate this array with all the existing tweens that I have. So I'm just going to paste a tween in there. I'm going to add a comma. Let me get rid of the properties panel so we can all see what's happening. And then I'm going to take the next tween. I'm going to cut it out and then we're going to put it on the next line, add my comma, and then we'll get the last tween. Once I've taken this last tween out and pasted it into that array, we'll be able to test how appendMultiple works. So let me get rid of all this. And in order to focus on just this part of the animation, I'm just going to comment out everything that's happening to all of those blobs right now. So we'll just put a block comment in there. And now I'm telling my timeline to append multiple tweens, and I'm giving it this array of tweens. And I'd also want to close off this parenthesis right here. So I'm ready to test, and watch what happens. Meet the blobs. You'll notice that all of those tweens now happen at the same time. They've all been appended to the timeline at the same time. Well, in order to add a little bit of sequencing here, I'm going to start adding more parameters to the appendMultiple method. The next parameter that we take is referred to as an offset value, and this is the amount of time that these tweens are added in relationship to the end of the timeline. Right now there aren't any prior tweens, so appendMultiple is going to work very similar to how a regular append would work. I'm going to just specify the value of 1 right now, and that means that these tweens will all be added 1 second at the end of the timeline. So we have a delay of 0.5 plus 1, just means we're going to have a longer delay before all those tweens again start at the same time. Now the next parameter is the one that's really going to dictate the spacing in between each tween. And this is called the align parameter. And that's why I built that tween align visualizer, so that we can see how all 3 align modes work. But right now we're using the default align mode, which is normal. And that means that all the tweens are going to start at the same time. Once I've put in an align mode, I also have a stagger parameter, okay? And stagger allows me to dictate how much space is going to be in between the start of each tween. So right now, by putting in a 0.2 here, I'm saying that the second tween will start 0.2 seconds after the first tween starts. And then of course the third tween will start 0.2 seconds after the second tween starts. So now I'm just going to have a little bit of a stagger or offset to my animation. Let's watch it. And you'll see they aren't all playing at once. That delay I'm having here is a little bit long, but we can have precise control over how these tweens overlap. So let me get rid of this offset of 1, that's a little bit much. Now what if I wanted to play one tween, then the next, and then the next? Well, all these tweens here have the same duration of 0.5, so I could set my stagger parameter to 0.5, and now you'll see what happens. The second tween starts after the first tween ends. Now, what happens if this second tween here is 1 second long? Well, it's no longer going to be 1 and then the next. You'll see that blobs starts before the ends. And I'll do that one more time so you can see. The and blobs comes in while the is still animated. So, although I can fake all of these running in a direct sequence if they're all the same duration, if they're not, I can change the align mode now to sequence, and I'm going to get rid of the stagger value temporarily. And now this means that all the tweens will play back to back. So I'll save, and we'll test. And now even though that middle tween is 1 second, it still has to play all the way through before the third tween can start. With the sequence, I can also add a stagger parameter if I say 0.5, but now this number here represents the amount of time between each tween finishing and the next one starting. So now tween 1 will play all the way through, and then there will be a 0.5 second delay pause before tween 2 starts. It will play all the way through, 0.5 second delay, and then tween 3 will play. So by mixing and matching these different align modes with the stagger property, you have precise control over exactly how each tween runs. I can also use in the sequence stagger amount a negative value. If I put in negative 0.2 here, what this means is that the second tween will start 0.2 seconds before the previous tween ends. So you see where this is going. Once I bust open that TweenAlign visualizer, you'll really have hands-on experience with experimenting with these different values, mixing and matching them. There is a third align mode called start, and that takes into account whether or not there are delays in your tweens, and it will ignore the delays. But again, you have to really see that to understand it. So that wraps up our first little piece of using appendMultiple. Next, I'm going to show you how we can get all of these tweens into our timeline with one line of code. I just want to point out real quickly that this is really one line of code right here, just broken up onto multiple lines so that it's easier to read. I could have it be 5 miles long across my screen, but that wouldn't help any of us. And again, the advantage of using appendMultiple over having 3 different appends is that it's very easy to change the alignment, the offset, and the stagger. Imagine this was 30 tweens. In order to sequence them, if we had different durations, would require a lot of work adding custom delays. Alright folks, now we're going to focus on how the blobs work. So I'm just going to hide that intro text animation real quick. And let's do a test. And you'll see that each blob comes in one after the next. It's a very easy sequence here. And we've built this by putting a series of appends into the timeline. Each blob has the same duration and it's tweening from the same values. Now I could build an array just like I did with the intro text, but since all of these values are the same, this works perfectly for using a TweenMax.allFrom tween. And as a quick refresher, you should know about allFrom. I'm going to demonstrate how it works. So allFrom takes an array of objects and loops through them for you, and it creates an array of tweens on those objects. So here I'm just going to paste in an array of all the instance names of all the blobs that I have, okay? And then I'm going to create a TweenMax.allFrom, and you'll see the first parameter that it wants is a targets array. So I'm going to give it my array of target objects called all blobs, and I'm going to say that each tween should take 0.5 seconds, and these are the properties that I should be tweening from. Just going to paste that there and close it out. Now let me also delete all of this, okay? So there's going to be no TimelineLite code running right now. We're just going to build this allFrom tween based on all of these targets. And you'll see right now that all of these objects are going to tween in at once. Now allFrom has its own stagger parameter. I could put in something like 0.4 here, and you'll see now that they come in with a little bit of a stagger. In order to be consistent with the syntax we've been using so far, I'm going to remove that stagger from the allFrom, and we're going to add it to the appendMultiple. Now, one of the mistakes that a lot of beginners make, and I see this a lot in the forums, is that they try to do tl.append. And append wants a single tween, okay? But if you put an allFrom into a basic append, let's see what happens, right? I'm going to force an error here. So this is not me making a mistake. Whoops, what happened? Well, we get this error that says implicit coercion of value type array to an unrelated type tween core. So it's trying to convert an array to a single tween core object. That could be a TweenLite, a TweenMax, a TimelineLite, or a TimelineMax. So we don't want to use append, we want to use appendMultiple. And what's happening here in technical terms is that TweenMax.allFrom is creating an array of tweens for us. So all of this code right here is similar to everything that we had with the array of tweens up here. allFrom returns an array. And if you really want to know for sure, you can go to the TweenMax documentation, and you'll see here that an allFrom does in fact return an array of TweenMax instances. So this means it's going to work really good with appendMultiple, because appendMultiple wants an array of tweens. They're going to make really good friends. So back in Flash, now that I have appendMultiple in here, let's give it a quick test. And there you go. So now that's all part of the timeline, and it runs exactly the same way as when it was outside of the timeline. But now that we have the tweens in there, I can say, all right, let's have a 0 offset. So that means it'll happen 0 seconds after the previous tweens run. Let me just bring those back into action by uncommenting them. And next we have our align parameter. So let me just very quickly put in sequence here. So now all those blobs are going to run in perfect sequence. One will come in, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. If I want this to happen quicker, I could change the duration of all the tweens, or I could add a little bit of overlap. I could use a sequence alignment, but then also say, let's do a -0.1 stagger. So let's give this a test, and you'll just see that there's a little bit of overlap now by 1/10 of a second if you're really sharp. And it's all very zippy and fun. Now, we've covered a lot about appendMultiple, and I want to point out now that we also have insertMultiple. And it works virtually the same way, but with insertMultiple, the offset value is a precise time or label that you want all of these tweens to be inserted into your timeline. So let's just say that I want all the blobs to start animating as soon as meetMC is done. Okay, so meetMC is the first tween, and it has a 0.5 second duration. So I'm just going to change the insertion time to be 0.5. And I'm also going to slow down the time scale here so we can really see that. I'm going to set the time scale equal to 0.7. So as soon as meetMC is done, now the blobs are going to start immediately afterwards. So I'm going to test. And there you go. As soon as meet was done animating, you saw the blobs come in. So insert puts the tweens at an exact point in time or at a label, whereas append always adds the tweens to the end of the timeline, and it has an offset value, which can be negative or positive. All right, next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you more about the align modes, and we're going to introduce the start align mode, and then we're going to get into doing nested timelines. It's going to be really cool. Now we're going to talk about the different align modes in depth. We've talked about normal and sequence, but there's also a TweenMax start alignment that aligns the start times of all the tweens, and it ignores the delays. Now that is different than normal, which will honor delays. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to demonstrate that to you in the TweenAlign visualizer. Now you may notice here that instead of using strings, we have these static constants here, TweenAlign.normal, all caps. Well, if we go to the GreenSock top level package, you'll see that there is a TweenAlign class. So if you import all the GreenSock classes, you'll have access to TweenAlign, and you will see that we have these public constants, normal, sequence, and start, all caps, and their string values are lowercase normal, lowercase sequence, and lowercase start. So it's perfectly acceptable to write out the class and constant name long form, or you can just use the string shorthand. So let's jump over to the Align visualizer, and in this tool here I have a very simple timeline built that controls 3 of these boxes changing their Y scale. And if I play this animation right now, you'll see that all the boxes animate at the same time. We're getting an output of the elapsed time in seconds of the entire duration of the timeline, and each box underneath it has a number dictating when it starts. Okay, so let's look at this code, which should now make some sense to you. And I'm using an appendMultiple, and I have an array of tweens here, and we're just tweening in bar 1, bar 2, and bar 3. They all have the same duration of 1 second, and they're all doing a scale Y change. Right now the tween alignment is set to normal, which means that all the tweens will start at the same time, and there is no stagger provided. Now if I change this alignment over to sequence, you'll see that it updates in the code, and then when I play the animation, the first box animates, then the next, and then the next. You'll see that the elapsed time is now 3 seconds because it takes into account all the durations being staggered, and you'll also see the start time of the second box is 1 second after the first box began. Now if I go back to normal and play again, you'll see it's what we expect. If I change the stagger amount to 0.5 and hit play, you'll see now that we have that little half a second stagger, and the first box starts 0.5 seconds later. we can also start adding delays and changing the durations. So let me bring that stagger amount back down to 0. And using a normal alignment, if I add a delay to bar number 1, let's just make it 2 seconds long, notice now that the first tween will start at 2 seconds, but the next tween will start at 0 and 0. Well, their start times are all aligned technically, but tween align normal takes into account the delay of the first tween. So now if I hit play, you'll see these two boxes start first, and then this guy begins 2 seconds after they start. So even though bar 1 appears first in code, that delay is affecting when it's going to start tweening. Now the big difference between normal and start is that start is going to ignore those delays. So the delay is still in the code here. The delay is still set for that first bar, but it's being ignored, and now they all start at the same time. So I strongly recommend that you monkey around with this tool a little bit, because it'll really show you the subtle differences between the alignment modes and how the stagger amount can change things. Now you could also mess with the offset amount, make that 3 seconds. Now the entire animation won't start until 3 seconds. They'll all start at the same time, and the duration will be 4 seconds. 3 seconds of delay in the beginning, and then 1 second of tween. So I could monkey around with this thing all day, folks, but I'm going to have this tool live here on ActiveTuts Plus, and it'll also be available to you in the downloads. So please experiment with it, and it's really going to help you visualize and understand how these parameters work. Now that you have a solid background on all the parameters, we're going to show you how we can insert or append multiple timelines into a master timeline. Alright folks, now that you understand that appendMultiple and insertMultiple can accept an array of tweens, I'm going to show you how we can pass appendMultiple an array of TimelineLites. Okay, this is going to be really cool, so you can now sequence very complex animations and also create them dynamically. And you'll see in this file that I have 10 blobs that are following the same animation style. They jump up, they spin around, they fall down, and they're always sliding to the right. And that entire animation can be controlled with this scrubber. And I'm also controlling the text with that scrubber. Now when I started this video, I said that we could build this whole animation and have this scrubber control a timeline that only had 2 lines of code. And now I'm going to show you exactly how we can do that. So let's jump over to Flash. And in this FLA here, I want to point out that there are no blobs on the stage. What we're going to be doing is using this blob symbol in the library that has a linkage identifier of blob. And I'm going to programmatically add the blob to the stage, put it into a timeline, and then make a lot of those timelines and put them all into a master timeline. So let's go over to the existing script that I have right now. The file that I'm starting with only has 1 blob animating, and you'll notice that this scrubber here does not control it. So I just have the animation for 1 blob. The text isn't even animating yet. Now what I'm doing is fairly straightforward, but I want to point out that I have my timeline max var called TL, and I also have my blob tweens array. And I'm going to show you how we're going to populate this array with a bunch of timeline lights that then gets appended to my timeline max. So just follow along here. Once my app inits, we're going to set up a slider and a restart button. We did all this in video 3, controlling playback. Now we're going to call a function called createBlobs, and then one called createMasterTimeline. And right now I want to focus on createBlobs. So right now createBlobs creates a single blob. It places it below the stage with a high Y value, and then we're adding that blob to the stage. We're then creating a timeline light called Blob Annie. And this timeline light is going to control all the animation of a single blob. And this timeline is using insertMultiple to add multiple tweens at once. Now, if you notice again in this animation, a lot is happening to this blob. He's moving up, he's moving to the right, he's spinning, and he's also moving down. So a lot of things are happening, and they're overlapping. So I'm using insertMultiple to add 4 tweens for that entire animation, and they're all sort of happening at the same time. So the first thing we have is this one tween that's 2 seconds long that moves him just from left to right. We're also creating a tween that moves him up for half a second to a y of 150. And then we have a longer tween that's taking care of the rotation, but the rotation doesn't start until 0.1 seconds after those previous two tweens happen. Once the up tween happens, it takes 0.5 seconds. You'll see that we have another tween that's moving him down to a y of 230. Now that's going to place him directly on that platform. And this tween has a delay of 0.5. So what's happening is he's moving up for 0.5 seconds, and then 0.5 seconds later, he's moving down. So again, we'll watch that one more time. And let's just say that I love this animation to death, okay? And I want to do this many times. So in order to do something many times, I'm going to use a for loop. I'm going to say for var I, it'll just be an int, equals 0. And then I'll say as long as I is less than 10, we'll run this loop and we'll always increment I. So now what's happening is I'm creating 10 blobs and 10 blob Annie timelines. Now before I test, I just realized that I need to put that curly bracket right here. Let me just do a quick auto format. Now what you might expect to happen is that now that I'm using a loop that we're going to see 10 animations. But that's not going to happen because right now I am creating 10 blobs and 10 timelines, but they're all starting at the same time in the same place. So really what I want to do is add all of these timelines to my master timeline and use appendMultiple to offset each one of them. So in order to do that, in my init function, I'm just going to make sure that my blob tweens array is created. All right, and then I'm going to add tweens to that blob tweens. I'm actually going to be adding timelines, I'm sorry. So as I'm looping through here, before my loop closes, after each timeline has been built, I'm going to say blob tweens dot push blob Annie. Now even doing that isn't going to change how these things stagger. Now that the timelines are created, they're all just still going to be now in an array. But if I go to my create timeline method, once I've instantiated my timeline max, I can say tl.appendMultiple, and I'm going to be passing in the array of timeline lights called blob tweens. I'm going to have an offset of 0, and let's use an align mode of sequence. And once I do that, one blob plays, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next, and we have 10 blob animations running here. If I hit the restart button, that's already hooked up, it's going to work. Well, I don't want to have to wait for one blob to finish playing before the next one comes in. A few things I could do is I could put a negative offset in here, but right now it would probably make sense to just say that the tween align is going to be normal, and we're going to use an offset of 0.5 seconds. So now I test it out, and you'll see that those blobs are much closer together. What's really cool is now that it's all in place, I can play with these numbers all I want. I can say it's going to start 0.02 seconds later, test, and you get something like that. You get this sort of like a motion trail effect. And I could even go so far as to say, you know what, let's make 30 blobs. Go back to my loop, save, test, and you see where this is going? You can do some really cool visual effects by just offsetting those tweens with different values. You know, that looks beautiful. Crazy, right? So for something more realistic so we can see those blobs, I think an offset of maybe around, 0.4 will keep them fairly close, and it's going to look cool. All right, so one blob after the next. What we can also do when we're building each blob timeline is we can randomize things a little bit too. Let's clean this up. And let's say for this y value, when they're jumping up, instead of jumping to a y of 150, I could say math.random times 220. So now each blob is going to jump to a different height. Pretty cool, right? So we add a little bit of organic change here. And now I have 30 blobs all jumping, and there's a little bit of randomness. And at any time, I can grab the slider, and I can rewind, I can fast forward. It's totally cool. What I want to do next is just show you how we can animate that text, knowing what we know already. So before all the blobs come in my timeline max, here I just pasted in insert multiple for the first tweens that are going to happen, and I'm doing a TweenMax.allFrom. And here I'm creating an array of all the text, meet MC, the MC, blobs MC. They're each going to take 0.5 seconds. They're all going to do the same thing. They're going to scale in from 0, and their tween align is going to be normal with a stagger of 0.3. So here in this example, we've pretty much combined everything we've learned up until this point, minus some label stuff, into a really cool timeline max that contains multiple timeline lights. We've used insertMultiple twice, we've used appendMultiple, and we're creating arrays now using a for loop, and we're putting timeline lights into timelines. So hopefully this opens up your eyes to all the potential, control, and flexibility you can have with your timeline lights. And again, this one little line of code, this one little appendMultiple, look how neat that is. We have our array of timelines built. This is when we're putting it in. This is our alignment, and this is our stagger. Now I mentioned using the TweenAlign visualizer that we can also use the static constants of the TweenAlign class. So I could write out TweenAlign.normal, and that would do the same thing. So I urge you guys to download these source files, play around with them, try to build your own timelines using an insertMultiple and appendMultiple. There's also a prependMultiple, which I didn't talk about, but it works pretty much the same thing, except that it puts all of your tweens or timelines at the beginning of your timeline light. So we've had a lot of fun so far. Next time we're going to come back and talk about Timeline Max and some of the features specific to Timeline Max, as well as show you some general tips and tricks for using both Timeline Lite and Timeline Max. So have a great week, folks. I'll catch you soon.